Hey everybody, I'm sitting in my bee yard. I don't know, maybe at 7 o'clock at night, 7:30. End of summer kind of. Well, I guess end of July. End of summer for me. I got another week or so and then I go back to school. I'm a school teacher. I'm going to talk about something about my bees today that I'm doing for the first time ever. I really wanted to catch a swarm this year, some wild bees. I wasn't successful at that, but a friend of mine, he's had a swarm trap up for years, and I bought some of that Swarm Commander, and he had only caught one swarm ever before in about 7 or 8 years, and I sprayed that Swarm Commander, and he had a swarm within less than 2 weeks. So the second swarm he's ever gotten from this trap. So the nice thing about catching wild bees is that they're free, which everybody wants free, right? A package of bees around here runs about 135 bucks. A nuke can be up to 180. So you get free bees. But also the benefit, if you catch a wild swarm, then hopefully those bees have survived a few generations in your local area and they've become adapted to your habitat. So something about their genes, something about their genetics has helped them survive over the winter, and hopefully they've survived several winters. So this is important too. A lot of people don't know this unless you're a beekeeper. Honeybees are not native to America. So we do have native bees like bumblebees and carpenter bees and things like that, but the honeybees that are used to harvest honey, though there's some debate, but it's basically kind of, they're native to the Middle East, maybe Eastern Europe, Northern Africa, kind of in that area is where honeybees originally came from, and they were brought over here by settlers and colonists and things like that. And they're basically an invasive species in some ways, but we like this invasive species. They do a lot for us. So they become adapted to the climate of America, and now, you know, they're everywhere. So even when you say wild bees, they weren't here originally. So I did not catch a swarm, but my friend caught a swarm. And he only lives about 4 miles away from me. As far as we know, there's no other beekeeper in between us, but I'm sure there may be one or two. But my friend knows most of the beekeepers, and I know a few. So our hope is if we can get good at genetics in our area, then that's going to help our future bees in general, as far as mating with wild drones, if we catch any future swarms. So even though I did not catch a swarm, my friend caught a swarm, and from that he's grafted some queens. So these are some queen cages. You can kind of see a queen right in there, hopefully. So there is a queen in here, and there's a queen in this queen cage. These come from the swarm, the wild caught swarm, and that swarm we know was wild caught because he had actually lost his beehives that year. I did as well. Most people in our area had 60% losses to total losses of beehives last year, and this hive was caught right when he got some new packages, and he wasn't missing any bees from his hives. So this was a wild caught swarm that was at least there for one winter, maybe several winters. It may have even been his bees from many years ago. He's been beekeeping in that at his farm for about a decade. So I mean, you know, there's a chance those bees may have came from him at one point, but they've lived in the wild on their own, and hopefully, since they've survived, survival of the fittest, it's not always the strongest or anything like that. It's the bees that can survive the longest in order to reproduce, right? That's really what survival of the fittest is about. The more fit they are, the more offspring they can have. So I'm going to replace my hives with these swarm queens, these wild caught swarm queens, and the hope is that now I'm going to be replacing the genetics, at least some of the genetics, with a wild swarm queen. She's gonna mate with a drone, most likely drones from my hives, but not necessarily. But she's going to have a new genetic line, and this hive has survived. So the theory and the hope is that I'm going to have better genetics in my hives. This last year we got our bees from South Carolina, and several friends also got their hives from the same place, and we actually lost about 40% of our queens died within the first month, and we had to get queens replaced, or I had a hive that made a queen. So I don't think those queens had great fitness because they had a 40% loss. So we're hoping this is going to be a lot better. So if you can't catch a swarm, see if you have a local friend or a local beekeeper that has caught a wild swarm. This is important. Catching your own swarms is great, because then you're not losing half of your bees, right? But if you can catch a wild swarm, which you can usually have a high degree of certainty, if you have your swarm trap set up where there aren't beekeepers within about a 2-mile radius, 3-mile radius, which sometimes that's hard to know for sure. But if you can set up your traps in places where there aren't beekeepers and you catch a swarm, that's probably a wild swarm. Now, if you catch bees on your own property, there's, you know, a much higher chance that you're catching your bees, unless it's a time of year where, you know, your bees aren't swarming. So hopefully this has been helpful. I'm really excited to have some new queens, and this is going to help reduce the mite load because these queens have to mate. It takes a couple days to get used to their hive. So there's going to be a break in the brood pattern in the egg production and the larva, and that's what the mite's like. So this is actually going to also help me lower my mite count, which I haven't found any mites yet this year, which is great. So keep on beekeeping, and if you've caught any swarms or if you've used any swarm queens, let me know how that's worked for you. I'd love to hear what you think.